In the heart of a fertile African valley, nestled between rolling hills and shimmering rivers, lay a village that thrived on its reputation for prosperity and tradition. This was a place where life followed rhythms as old as the earth itself. The rising sun dictated the work of the farmers, the flowing river provided sustenance, and the elders dictated the laws of conduct and morality. Yet beneath the vibrant laughter of the marketplace and the vibrant songs of children running along dusty paths, a quiet tension simmered, a tension born from envy, injustice, and the subtle, unseen forces that often stirred in human hearts. Amid the stone and clay huts, where palm leaves and thatched roofs created a mosaic of life, there lived a young woman whose presence was like a gentle dawn breaking after a long night. Her skin bore the warmth of the sun and her eyes carried the clarity of the river reflecting the sky. Her hands were skilled, tending the soil, preparing meals, and helping the sick and elderly in the village. She was a model of kindness, diligence, and humility, yet in the shadows of admiration, envy silently grew. Her stepmother, a woman whose beauty had once turned heads but whose spirit had become hardened by greed and dissatisfaction, watched her every move with a careful, calculating eye. The stepmother's eyes flickered with resentment whenever the young woman laughed, or when villagers praised her gentle deeds. She envied not just her daughter's beauty but her quiet wisdom and the effortless respect she commanded. The comparison gnawed at the stepmother, a constant reminder of her own shortcomings. Every smile that the young woman offered to neighbors, every graceful movement as she worked in the fields, seemed to mock the stepmother in subtle, invisible ways. The village itself became a stage where this quiet drama unfolded. Gossip traveled faster than the wind, and every whispered compliment to the girl's character seemed to intensify the storm brewing within her stepmother. The girl herself noticed the thinly veiled glances, the sighs of irritation whenever her work was praised, and the subtle commands that tried to diminish her presence. She felt the invisible weight of expectation, the pressure to remain unseen in her own home, and the suffocating air of envy that clung like a shadow to every corner of her dwelling. Yet there was more to this village than what the human eye could see. Beneath the earth, in the soil tilled by farmers and caressed by her gentle hands, ancient forces slumbered. Old spirits of the land, guardians of balance and justice, watched over the people with patience that spanned generations. They sensed the quiet suffering of the young woman, her devotion, and her purity of heart. They also noticed the growing darkness within her stepmother, a darkness fueled by greed, envy, and unspoken cruelty. In subtle ways the spirits began to stir, whispering through the rustling leaves, the flowing river, and the shadows cast by the waning sun. The young woman, however, remained unaware of these hidden observers. She moved through her days with grace, performing her chores, helping neighbors, and enduring the subtle cruelty that awaited her at home. Her resilience became almost ritualistic, an unconscious practice of patience and fortitude in the face of injustice. Though her back ached from labor, and her spirit sometimes trembled with the weight of her stepmother's scrutiny, she never allowed bitterness to rule her heart. Each kind gesture she offered, each gentle smile shared with a villager, seemed to accumulate power not of this world, a power the stepmother could neither see nor comprehend. This was a village where appearances were valued above truth, where wealth and social standing could mask cruelty, and where envy could infect even the most harmonious homes. The girl's very existence became a mirror, reflecting both virtue and vice, innocence and malice. Her hands, though covered in soil from tending fields, symbolized purity and diligence. Her voice, soft and gentle, carried the weight of sincerity. And yet, the silent eyes of those around her, the stepmother's vigilant gaze, the envious whispers of peers, and the cautious observation of villagers, watched every move, waiting for a misstep, a sign of weakness, or a moment to assert dominance. Beneath the human drama, the subtle magic of the land responded. The wind seemed to caress her hair more gently, the river rippled in patterns that mirrored her calm presence, and the sun's rays touched her skin with unusual warmth. It was as though the village itself, or something older and wiser, recognized her worth, her virtue, and the injustice she faced. The magic did not reveal itself outright, but its quiet acknowledgement was there, hidden in the glint of dew on morning grass and the shimmer of sunlight across the thatched rooftops. In this village of strife and quiet wonders, the stage was set. The young woman, unaware of her latent power, continued her work, enduring envy and malice with unbroken spirit. The forces that watched, both human and spiritual, prepared to respond. Beneath the surface, a story of injustice, resilience, and hidden magic was beginning to unfold, a story that would soon transform the ordinary into the extraordinary, and reveal that even in a world of envy and cruelty, virtue could command attention, respect, and the intervention of forces far beyond mortal comprehension. The sun rose slowly over the village, casting long shadows across the dusty paths and mud-brick homes. Its light should have heralded a new day, filled with labor, laughter, and the familiar rhythms of village life. But for the young woman, this day held a cruel anticipation that made her stomach twist in knots. Her stepmother had awakened earlier than usual, her face a mask of malice and scheming, and had summoned the girl for a task that was far from ordinary. Today, the cruelty that had simmered quietly beneath the surface would erupt in full view, and the village would bear witness to a spectacle designed to humiliate her completely. The girl, her heart heavy with apprehension, followed her stepmother and a group of other women to the edge of the village courtyard. The dirt underfoot was soft from last night's rains, but patches of dried mud clung stubbornly to stones and the roots of small trees. The stepmother's eyes flickered with an unsettling excitement, as though she were savoring a meal yet to be eaten. Around them, some villagers began to gather, drawn by curiosity or gossip, unaware of the sinister plot that was about to unfold. Whispers passed like a silent wind. What is she to do this time? Her stepmother grows crueler each day. And with each whispered word, the tension around the young woman tightened like a cord around her chest. The tormentors were many. Children she had played with once now stood awkwardly on the sidelines, unsure of where their loyalties lay, while neighbors looked on, faces unreadable but eyes flicking nervously from the girl to her stepmother. The young woman felt the weight of their gaze like 1,000 invisible hands pressing her to the ground. She kept her head low, cheeks burning with a mixture of shame, fear, and defiance. She had endured countless injustices, but today the act of humiliation was to be both public and absolute. Without a word, the stepmother signaled to the group of women holding buckets of thick, dark mud. The girl's stomach turned as they approached, the odor of damp earth mixing with the faint smell of sweat from the laboring villagers. She flinched instinctively, but there was no escape. Their hands grabbed at her arms, her hair, her shoulders, pulling her into the center of the courtyard where everyone could see. The mud, heavy and cold, began to smear over her skin, first on her hands, then her feet, and finally her face. Each layer felt like a weight pressing not only on her body but on her very soul. Her hands, the hands that had healed, helped, and created, were now coated with earth that mocked her purity and diligence. Her heart pounded, and tears threatened to fall, not from the cold or the dirt, but from the sheer humiliation of being paraded as an object of ridicule. The stepmother's laughter echoed across the courtyard, sharp and relentless, and the tormentors joined in, their voices rising in unison. Even the birds in the nearby trees seemed to quiet as though nature itself paused to witness the cruelty. She felt the mud settling into her hair, clinging to her eyelashes and weighing down her limbs. Each movement was an effort, and each breath brought the bitter taste of dirt into her mouth. Yet through it all, she refused to cry aloud, refusing to give them the satisfaction of hearing her voice break under the assault. The villagers, for the most part, continued to watch in silence. Some averted their eyes, uncomfortable with the spectacle. Others, however, seemed to find a grim entertainment in her suffering, murmuring among themselves about her deserved punishment. "She is too proud," one whispered. "She thinks herself better than her stepmother," said another. But beneath these voices, older villagers noticed something that younger ones did not. The mud did not seem to taint her in the way it should. It clung to her, yes, but there was a faint shimmer, almost imperceptible in the sunlight, as if the earth itself were hesitating to soil her completely. As the mud continued to cover her body, a quiet transformation began. Her posture, though hunched from the weight and shame, did not break. Her gaze, though cast downward, remained clear and steady. The coldness of the wet earth against her skin could not numb the fire growing inside her. A fire of patience, resilience, and the quiet certainty that cruelty could not truly define her. She felt something ancient stirring beneath her flesh, a force older than the village, older than the stepmother's malice. It whispered promises of balance, of dignity, and of retribution that did not require her hand to strike. Hours passed, or perhaps only moments, for time seemed suspended in that courtyard of humiliation. The crowd began to disperse slightly, though some remained to murmur and gossip. The young woman stood still, mud-covered and weary, yet unbroken. Her hands, though caked in earth, still carried the invisible energy of her labor and kindness, and her heart, though heavy with shame, had begun to transform sorrow into quiet strength. Even the stepmother's laughter, sharp and high-pitched, could not pierce the growing aura of inevitability that seemed to radiate from her. By the end of the day, as the sun began to sink behind the hills, casting long shadows across the courtyard, the girl was finally released. The mud, though still thick on her skin, glimmered faintly in the dying light. The humiliation meant to crush her spirit had done the opposite. She walked away from the courtyard not as a defeated girl, but as a figure quietly gathering power, patience, and wisdom. And as she disappeared into the shade of the village paths, there was a sense, even if only a whisper among the old spirits of the land, that the mud would not remain mud for long. It would soon become something entirely different, something that reflected her true essence. After the long ordeal in the courtyard, the young woman trudged along the narrow dirt paths that led away from the eyes of the villagers, her body heavy with mud and exhaustion. Every step she took was a reminder of the cruel spectacle she had endured, yet beneath the weight of humiliation, something unusual began to stir. It started as a faint warmth across her skin, an almost imperceptible sensation that contrasted sharply with the cold, wet mud still clinging to her body. The sensation was gentle at first, like a whisper brushing against her arms, but gradually it grew, spreading across her shoulders, her hands, her face, as if some unseen force sought to wrap her in protection rather than punishment. She paused at the edge of the village well, her eyes scanning the horizon where the last light of day melted into shadow. The villagers were now largely gone, retreating to their homes and fires, unaware of what was quietly unfolding just beyond their notice. Her breath formed tiny clouds in the chilly evening air, and she noticed, almost absent-mindedly, that the mud glimmered faintly in the dim light, catching colors that shouldn't exist in ordinary earth. It shimmered gold and copper in some places, and even a trace of silver along her fingers, as though the very substance meant to degrade her had begun to celebrate her. The young woman shivered, not from cold, but from the strange energy that coursed subtly around her. It was neither frightening nor harsh, rather, it felt like a protective presence, ancient and patient, observing her resilience and quietly responding. She raised a hand and watched as a faint glow seemed to emanate from her palm, a soft pulse that matched the rhythm of her heartbeat. She blinked in disbelief, thinking it a trick of the dying sun or the reflection of the mud, yet the feeling persisted, undeniable and intimate. The warmth continued to grow, and with it came a whisper, a voice too faint to be caught by anyone else, yet as clear to her as the rustling of leaves. "You are seen," the whisper said. It was not spoken aloud, yet the words resonated in her mind with a clarity that sent a shiver down her spine. "Your suffering is known. Your patience is counted. Your virtue is the seed of what will come." The girl's heart skipped. She glanced around, half expecting to find a figure cloaked in shadow or a village elder who had lingered, but the paths were empty. The whispering felt as if it came from everywhere and nowhere at once, from the mud on her skin, from the air itself, from the faint glimmer of stars above. Her body, heavy with fatigue, now carried an electric lightness, and her spirit, bruised though it was, began to sense a presence she had never experienced before. As she continued along the path, the forest at the edge of the village seemed to respond to her. Branches lifted slightly as if nodding in recognition, and the wind swirled in soft patterns, playful yet deliberate, brushing against her face in a way that felt almost sentient. A lone owl perched on a nearby tree observed silently, its amber eyes reflecting more than mere curiosity. They seemed to see her for who she truly was. And beneath it all, the whispering persisted, weaving around her thoughts. "Patience is your shield. Strength is your companion. Justice will follow in your wake." Meanwhile, the villagers, oblivious to the subtle wonders occurring right outside their homes, carried on with their evening routines. They murmured about the day's events, unaware that the mud they had gleefully used to humiliate her had become a conduit for something extraordinary. They could not see the faint gold glimmers on her shoulders, nor feel the warmth that now made the chill of the evening inconsequential. Their laughter, which had been sharp and cutting, now seemed almost meaningless, echoing faintly against the backdrop of a power that was awakening quietly, inexorably, in the young woman. With each step she began to feel more grounded in this new energy. Her movements, though deliberate and careful, carried an unspoken authority. The mud, once an instrument of degradation, had transformed into a canvas upon which her emerging magic left subtle marks, faint luminescence that shimmered like living fireflies in motion, so delicate that it could only be noticed by those attuned to the unseen. Her hands, still coated in the sticky mixture, no longer felt weighed down. Instead, they tingled with potential, as if each finger could reach out and touch not only the physical world but something deeper, spiritual, elemental, and alive. Night fell fully, and the first stars blinked open in the inky sky. The whispers intensified, not with words but with feelings, assurance, guidance, and a quiet reverence. "You are the keeper of balance," they seemed to say. "The world responds to your heart. The cruelty you endured was not wasted. And in that moment, the young woman realized that the humiliation, the shame, and the public spectacle were never the end. They were the spark that had ignited this slow, subtle awakening of power, patience, and unseen grace. By the time she returned to the small shelter near the village edge, she carried herself differently, calm, radiant, and quietly formidable. The villagers would not notice anything unusual. Their eyes were blind to the invisible forces aligning with her. Yet even in their ignorance, a subtle shift had occurred. The mud that had sought to humiliate her now glimmered faintly under the moonlight, reflecting her resilience and hinting at the extraordinary that lay ahead. She smiled softly to herself, knowing that this spark, small though it seemed, would grow into something that even the harshest oppressors could not withstand. The morning dawned with a quiet stillness that seemed almost unnatural. The young woman awoke on the edge of the village, her body still sticky from the mud that had been hurled upon her the day before. She blinked against the weak sunlight, expecting only the grime and discomfort she had endured, yet immediately something caught her eye. Where the mud had dried across her arms, shoulders, and legs, faint specks of golden shimmer began to emerge. At first she thought it a trick of the light, the reflection from the early sun filtering through the trees, but as she flexed her fingers and moved her arms, the golden hue seemed to flow with her as if alive. Her heartbeat quickened, a mix of wonder and disbelief. The mud that had symbolized humiliation and cruelty, the same mud she had believed would leave her disfigured, marked, and ashamed, was transforming. The dark, sticky substance began to shift in color, from brown to coppery tones, and finally to soft, radiant gold. Each movement she made seemed to accelerate the change, and soon her arms gleamed faintly, the surface smooth and warm to the touch. She pressed her palms to the earth and felt the same subtle warmth and energy she had sensed the night before, but now it was stronger, more tangible, as if the very substance covering her body had begun to recognize her essence and respond. Her eyes widened as the transformation continued along her legs and torso. The mud, once heavy and oppressive, now sparkled and flowed almost fluidly, bending and shaping itself to her body, highlighting her contours with an ethereal light. It wasn't just the shimmer that amazed her, it was the sense of power and life that emanated from it. The golden sheen seemed to carry the whispers of the earth, the ancestors, and the unseen spirits that had watched her suffering. Each speck of gold pulsed faintly, almost like the beat of a heartbeat, and as she inhaled the crisp morning air, she felt an undeniable connection to something far greater than herself. She moved carefully, half afraid, half exhilarated. Every step she took was accompanied by the soft glimmer of gold shifting beneath her feet. Even the birds perched on nearby trees paused to watch her movements, their eyes reflecting the faint golden radiance. Leaves rustled as if in silent applause, and the wind seemed to caress her hair gently, carrying whispers she could not yet fully understand. It was as if the world itself acknowledged the transformation taking place, a quiet recognition that something extraordinary was occurring, and that she was at the center of it. The golden mud continued to spread across her shoulders and neck, softening the sharpness of her features with a gentle luminescence. Her reflection in a small puddle caught her attention. For the first time since the cruelty had begun, she did not see a victim or a figure shamed by the village. Instead, she saw a woman marked by resilience, patience, and the subtle approval of unseen forces. The glow of gold framed her face, highlighting her eyes, which now seemed to hold a faint, inner light of their own. She felt her breath catch, a mixture of awe and understanding that the transformation was more than skin deep. It resonated with the core of her spirit, her courage, and her endurance. As she walked toward the forest at the village's edge, she noticed how the golden shimmer seemed to react to her movements. Where she stepped, the ground felt warmer, and small sparks of light rose briefly from the earth as if celebrating her survival and resilience. Flowers along the path bent slightly toward her, and even the air seemed to hum with quiet energy. Every fiber of her being vibrated with an unusual awareness. She was no longer merely the girl who had been humiliated by mud and cruelty. She had become a vessel for something extraordinary, a visible reminder that patience, virtue, and endurance could manifest power in the most unexpected forms. Her thoughts wandered to the villagers who had mocked her, who had thrown the mud with laughter and malice. They were oblivious to the transformation taking place, blind to the subtle miracles that now marked her. Yet she felt no immediate desire for vengeance. Instead, a quiet clarity settled within her. This gold, this magic, was a reflection of her endurance and inner strength. It was proof that cruelty and envy could never truly diminish the heart that remained pure and patient, and that sometimes, the universe itself intervened to honor those who endured suffering with dignity. The golden mud continued to glow softly as the sun climbed higher, its warmth blending with the radiance on her skin. She felt her spirit expand with every breath, her mind clear, her senses sharpened. The transformation was no longer merely an outward phenomenon. It had become a conduit through which she could sense the rhythms of nature, the whispers of the earth, and the subtle movements of unseen forces. It was as though every humiliation she had endured had been stored, not as shame, but as energy waiting for the right moment to awaken. By mid-morning she reached the edge of the forest. There she paused and looked back at the village that had scorned her. The golden glow of the mud reflected faintly against the houses, catching the attention of the few early risers. They squinted, unsure of what they saw, yet the shimmer was too subtle to provoke immediate comprehension. The young woman smiled softly, understanding that her transformation was both a revelation and a quiet promise. A power born of patience, suffering, and inner strength would soon reveal itself fully, and the world would take notice, whether willingly or not. Her journey, once marked by humiliation and fear, had become a walk of quiet majesty. The mud that was meant to degrade her had become gold, a tangible manifestation of her resilience, her spirit, and the extraordinary destiny that awaited her. And as she stepped into the shadows of the forest, she felt for the first time a complete sense of self, unbroken, luminous, and ready to rise beyond the cruelty that had sought to bind her. By mid-morning, word of the young woman's transformation began to spread through the village. Those who had stayed in their homes or hidden behind fences and walls were now compelled to witness the spectacle with their own eyes. At first, disbelief clouded the villagers' minds. Mothers paused in the market, baskets of fruit in their hands, mouths open, staring as she moved gracefully through the streets, the golden mud on her skin catching the sun's light and reflecting it in soft, ethereal glimmers. Fathers and elders squinted, whispering to one another, insisting that their eyes deceived them, that it could not be possible for a mortal to shine in such a way. The children who had once mocked her stopped in their tracks. Their laughter froze in mid-air as though replaced amusement. Small hands clutched the skirts of older siblings as their wide eyes followed the shimmering figure. Even the animals in the village seemed to sense the extraordinary aura she carried. Dogs whimpered softly, birds perched silently on fences, and goats that had once wandered freely now hesitated, keeping a careful distance. There was a tangible shift in the air, a mixture of wonder, fear, and uncertainty that blanketed the streets, filling every alleyway and courtyard with quiet tension. The stepmother, meanwhile, had emerged from her lavish house, drawn by the whispers and commotion. Her face, once confident and proud, now twisted with disbelief and terror. She stood frozen in the doorway, mouth agape, her hands trembling as she tried to comprehend the impossible. The young woman, once the subject of her scorn and cruelty, now radiated a power and dignity that seemed almost divine. The stepmother's heart pounded with a mixture of fear, envy, and guilt. Every cruel act she had committed, the laughter, the insults, the relentless attempts to humiliate, now seemed insignificant compared to the brilliance before her. Some villagers tried to rationalize the sight, shaking their heads and muttering to one another. "It's a trick," they whispered. Some clever dust, some sunlight reflecting off the river. Others argued more aggressively, insisting it was impossible for mud to turn to gold, that the girl could not have survived the shame and toil to emerge in such splendor. Yet, every denial faltered under the undeniable radiance she carried, the warmth of her presence, and the subtle reverence that even the earth seemed to offer her. The women who had once stood beside the stepmother, smirking as the young girl had been humiliated, now recoiled in shock. Their envy, which had simmered quietly for years, erupted in sudden fear and discomfort. They could feel the shift in power, subtle yet overwhelming, and it left them trembling. They avoided direct eye contact, yet could not help following her movements, every shimmer of gold reflecting a silent accusation of their own complicity in past cruelties. The men of the village, too, felt unease. Those who had laughed at her, ignored her suffering, or whispered cruel jokes now felt a pang of guilt. They tried to dismiss it as imagination or the exaggeration of storytellers, but the tangible presence of the golden woman made denial impossible. There was no escape from her aura. It pressed upon their senses, reminding them of every injustice and every unkind thought they had harbored. Some stepped back, bowing heads and averting eyes, while others whispered prayers, seeking protection or forgiveness from powers they could not fully comprehend. Even the children who had once run alongside her, calling her names or mocking her tears, now stood frozen in reverence. Their innocence allowed them to see without judgment, and they felt the extraordinary nature of what had occurred. A few timidly approached, their eyes wide, and when she glanced at them, there was a softness, a hint of acknowledgement, that made the air shimmer even more. She did not scold or curse them. Her power radiated as a quiet, undeniable force, both awe-inspiring and instructive. Meanwhile, the stepmother's fear morphed into desperation. She opened her mouth to speak, to deny, to command, but no words could form. The humiliation she had sought to inflict for years had rebounded in the most extraordinary way imaginable. Her mind raced, trying to recall the rituals, curses, or manipulations she had employed, yet all seemed powerless against the reality before her eyes. The girl she had tormented, the one she had sought to bury beneath mud and shame, now embodied a visible, undeniable power that demanded recognition. Some villagers, overwhelmed by envy and fear, began to murmur excuses, attempting to diminish the spectacle. "Perhaps it is the work of spirits," they said. "A trick of light, the wind, something mystical, yes, but surely not permanent." Yet even their words lacked conviction. The Golden Woman moved with a quiet authority, each step deliberate, each glance carrying a weight of moral clarity and dignity that rendered disbelief impossible. By midday, the village square had begun to fill with onlookers. Mothers, fathers, elders, and children, all drawn by the strange glow, watched in a mixture of reverence and fear. Even those who had initially mocked her could not hide their astonishment. Whispers spread rapidly, words carrying the weight of awe. "She is blessed. She is powerful. She endured cruelty and rose above it." Every murmured statement reinforced the realization that the transformation was real and that the Golden Woman's endurance had been recognized by forces far beyond human understanding. The stepmother, her composure shattered, sank to the ground. Her hands covered her face as guilt, fear, and regret overwhelmed her. She could no longer claim authority or control. Her power had been usurped by the very girl she had sought to crush. Villagers looked on, witnessing the reversal of fortunes, the undeniable truth that cruelty and envy could never triumph over patience, virtue, and resilience. And so, as the Golden Woman moved through the village, the reactions of onlookers solidified a profound truth. Those who mock, oppress, or envy will tremble before the power of endurance and goodness, while the innocent, though tested and tormented, will shine unmistakably, commanding awe, respect, and justice without uttering a word. As the villagers' astonishment reverberated through the streets, the young woman began to feel a profound shift within herself. No longer the timid, tormented girl who had endured humiliation and envy, she now carried herself with a quiet authority that radiated from every gesture. The golden mud on her skin, which had once been a source of shock and disbelief to those around her, now became a tangible symbol of her resilience, virtue, and the hidden strength that had always resided within her. Each glimmer of gold caught the sunlight and seemed to pulse with an inner energy, a silent declaration of her triumph over cruelty and oppression. She walked slowly through the village square, aware of every eye upon her. Yet, unlike before, she felt no fear, no hesitation. The laughter and jeers of the past had been replaced by awe, respect, and even envy from some, but these emotions no longer had the power to affect her. The golden sheen covering her skin felt warm, comforting, and empowering, as though the earth itself had wrapped her in a protective embrace. Every step she took reinforced the realization that she was no longer merely enduring life's injustices. She was actively shaping her own destiny. Her mind, sharpened by years of suffering and reflection, embraced clarity. She understood the dual nature of her transformation. The gold was not merely a miraculous event but a mirror of her inner virtues made visible. It reflected patience, the endurance of trials, moral fortitude, and an unwavering commitment to goodness. Each shimmer in the sunlight seemed to whisper that true power lay not in domination or cruelty, but in the steadfast preservation of one's integrity even when the world seeks to strip it away. She began to see her life's trials not as punishments, but as the very forge that had tempered her spirit, giving her the strength to rise beyond the petty malice that had once seemed insurmountable. As she moved among the villagers, she felt a gentle yet undeniable connection to the land itself. The flowers at the edges of the streets seemed to lean toward her, the leaves of trees shimmered as if reflecting her radiance, and the wind carried a faint, harmonious whisper that seemed to acknowledge her presence. Animals that had previously avoided her or shown fear now regarded her with a serene curiosity. Even the river, flowing quietly at the edge of the village, caught the golden light and shimmered as though echoing the extraordinary changes she had undergone. Nature, it seemed, had recognized her virtues and was offering a subtle affirmation of her unique power. Confidence, once a foreign concept, now infused her movements. She lifted her head high, straightened her shoulders, and met the gaze of villagers without a flicker of doubt. Every step, every glance, conveyed a sense of authority grounded in moral clarity rather than intimidation. Those who had once tormented her or sought to diminish her spirit felt a quiet unease, sensing that they now stood in the presence of someone who could not be swayed by fear or envy. The Golden Woman was no longer a victim of circumstance. She had become the living embodiment of endurance and integrity, commanding respect simply through the power of her being. The realization of her gift brought with it a profound sense of purpose. She understood that her transformation was not merely for personal vindication. It carried a moral weight, a lesson for the entire village. Cruelty, envy, and malice could never overcome virtue and resilience. The gold upon her skin was a beacon, a visible testament to the power of patience, endurance, and moral courage. She felt a responsibility to walk with grace and to act with wisdom, knowing that her actions and presence now served as both example and warning to all who witnessed them. Even the stepmother, still trembling at the edge of the crowd, could sense the depth of the young woman's transformation. The terror in her eyes was no longer just fear of shame or social disapproval. It was the recognition of a power she could neither control nor diminish. The girl's composure, her calm confidence, and the radiant glow of her golden form were a mirror of everything the stepmother had attempted to destroy but had failed to conquer. Every ounce of cruelty, every act of envy, had only strengthened the very qualities she had tried to suppress. The villagers began to understand, albeit slowly, that they were witnessing something extraordinary. Some knelt, offering silent respect. Others stood in stunned silence, unable to articulate the awe they felt. Children pointed and whispered, eyes wide with wonder, while elders exchanged solemn glances, recognizing the moral and spiritual weight of what had transpired. The Golden Woman was no longer just a victim or a survivor. She had become a living parable, a symbol of virtue and resilience that transcended mere human comprehension. In this moment she fully embraced the power within her. She allowed herself to feel the warmth, strength, and clarity that radiated from the golden sheen on her skin. Every previous tear, every moment of suffering, every instance of humiliation, coalesced into a singular source of inner authority. She understood that her power was rooted in her endurance, in the purity of her heart, and in the unshakable strength of character that had carried her through darkness into light. As the sun rose higher in the sky, casting its rays across the village, the young woman walked with purpose and grace, golden and unyielding. She was no longer defined by the cruelty of others or the constraints of circumstance. She had transcended them, embodying a luminous truth, that resilience, virtue, and hidden strength, when fully embraced, shine brighter than any attempt to suppress them, and that the world, in its awe and fear, must recognize those who endure with unwavering courage. As the golden radiance of her skin glimmered in the morning sun, the young woman became more than just a remarkable sight. She became a living emblem of truth and justice. The transformation that had taken place on her body, turning the mud that was meant to humiliate her into a radiant gold, did more than mark her as extraordinary. It revealed the intentions, character, and moral failings of those who had sought to diminish her. Every onlooker could see the stark contrast between her virtue and the envy, cruelty, and pettiness of her tormentors. The power she now embodied did not require threats, anger, or violent retribution. It acted as a mirror reflecting the truth in its purest, most undeniable form. Villagers who had once laughed at her, jeered at her struggles, or turned a blind eye to her suffering now found themselves caught in the quiet weight of exposure. Some tried to avert their eyes as if by refusing to see, they could erase the truth from existence. But the golden sheen on her skin, coupled with the calm authority in her gaze, made avoidance impossible. Even the stepmother, who had orchestrated the cruel act of covering her in mud, could not hide the shame and terror that rose in her chest. The golden light highlighted every deceit, every act of malice, every silent wish that the young woman would fail, suffer, or be diminished. Justice in this moment unfolded naturally, without the need for punishment by hand or violence. The truth itself became the instrument of reckoning. Villagers began to whisper among themselves, their voices low and tremulous, as they realized the depth of wrongdoing that had occurred in their midst. Those who had enabled the cruelty, whether through silence or participation, felt the heavy weight of accountability settle upon them. Even without direct confrontation, the moral imbalance became palpable. The Golden Woman's presence radiated a force that made pretense, denial, and arrogance impossible. The stepmother, pale and trembling, experienced a profound shift in perception. She could feel the collective gaze of the village upon her, sharpened by the reflection of the Golden Woman's radiant virtue. The weight of her own malice, which she had believed was hidden or cunningly concealed, became unbearable. Her cruelty had failed not just because of the girl's inner resilience, but because virtue, when fully embodied, has a way of illuminating the darkest corners of human behavior. She could see that the villagers now recognized not only the young woman's power but the disparity between her own malevolence and the courage, patience, and integrity that had allowed the girl to rise above. Nature itself seemed to acknowledge the justice that was unfolding. The breeze carried a gentle rustle through the trees as if whispering approval. Birds perched on branches tilted their heads toward the golden figure, their songs quiet and measured, harmonizing with the solemnity of the moment. Even the earth beneath their feet seemed to hum with recognition of the moral order being restored. In this extraordinary stillness, justice required no swords, no imprisonment, and no cries of vengeance. It manifested as recognition, respect, and the unflinching acknowledgement of the truth. The villagers' understanding grew with each passing moment. They observed how the young woman carried herself. Her composure, calm, and unwavering gaze demanded reflection, not rebellion. The golden transformation was not merely cosmetic, it was symbolic. It communicated resilience, moral clarity, and the unyielding light of virtue. Everyone present felt, with increasing clarity, that the humiliation and envy that had been so casually inflicted upon her had been exposed, dissolved, and reversed by forces beyond human control. The very act meant to shame her had revealed the character of her oppressors and restored balance without a single strike of violence. Even those who had thought themselves clever, manipulating circumstances to hide cruelty, were not spared. The moral mirror extended to all who had allowed injustice to persist. Their hearts and minds were confronted with the truth. Wrongdoing, envy, and cruelty cannot remain hidden when faced with virtue fully realized. The golden woman's silent, dignified presence demanded acknowledgement, confession, and a re-evaluation of actions. Justice, in its purest form, had taken root, and it was anchored in the collective realization of what was right. The girl herself understood the depth of this revelation. She felt no anger or desire for revenge. Such impulses were unnecessary and beneath the power that now flowed through her being. Her inner strength, patience, and moral clarity had already achieved what force or violence could not. She had endured, she had risen, and her transformation had communicated lessons too profound for mere words. Every subtle gesture, every glimmer of gold, every calm step she took served as testament to the immutable power of justice rooted in virtue. The villagers watched in awe, realizing that the story of the girl and the golden mud would be recounted for generations. It would serve as a parable. Cruelty and envy may attempt to harm, humiliate, or suppress, but true virtue, patience, and resilience always find a way to assert themselves. The young woman had demonstrated that justice need not be vengeful. It needed only to be present, embodied, and undeniable. Her power lay not in harming others, but in revealing truth, inspiring reflection, and restoring balance. In the end, the transformation and the quiet justice that followed reshaped the village's understanding of morality, power, and human behavior. Those who had tried to diminish her learned, without physical punishment, the profound consequences of their envy and cruelty. And the young woman, golden and serene, stood as a living symbol, that truth and justice are inseparable, that virtue shines brightest in adversity, and that the consequences of wrongdoing will always find a way to be revealed. The golden radiance that now adorned her skin did more than mark her as extraordinary, it transformed the perception of everyone in the village. No longer was she the girl who had been mocked, humiliated, and subjected to the cruel whims of envy. She had become a living symbol of resilience, virtue, and spiritual blessing, and the villagers began to see her with reverence, awe, and deep respect. Her journey through suffering, patience, and transformation had left a lasting impression, one that would alter the way the village remembered justice, morality, and the power of inner strength. Initially, villagers approached cautiously. They were unsure how to interact with someone who had endured so much yet had emerged radiant and seemingly touched by divine or mystical forces. Mothers whispered to their children, elders nodded knowingly, and even the once proud young men averted their gaze, humbled by her presence. The girl's calm composure, her serene movements, and the gentle glow of the gold on her skin created an aura that demanded not just attention but recognition. She did not speak in a commanding voice or issue orders. Her dignity and the unmistakable truth in her being were enough to command respect. Her former tormentors, particularly the stepmother and the peers who had taken part in her humiliation, found themselves facing a complicated mix of emotions. Guilt pressed heavily upon them, a weight made heavier by the undeniable display of her virtue and the natural consequences of their cruelty. Awe mingled with fear, for they could see that the transformation was not superficial. It was a reflection of moral truth, spiritual blessing, and cosmic recognition of her endurance. Every sneer they had once shared, every insult they had hurled, and every cruel act now reflected back upon them as evidence of their own failings. As the villagers observed, they realized that this was not merely a personal triumph. It was a communal lesson in morality and human behavior. Children were the first to notice, their innocent eyes wide with curiosity and wonder. They whispered among themselves, asking questions about what had happened, why the girl had endured so much, and how the mud that had been intended to shame her had become gold. Elders explained patiently, teaching the children that cruelty, envy, and malice are always revealed, that virtue has its own unyielding power, and that true strength lies not in harming others but in enduring hardship with integrity and resilience. The stepmother, once the source of relentless torment, felt the full weight of her guilt. Her eyes, which had once been sharp with cunning and control, now darted nervously, trying to evade the glances of those around her. The villagers could see the change in her demeanor, the trembling of her hands, and the way her posture shrank under the scrutiny of both community and spiritual observation. She had been a figure of authority and oppression, but the girl's transformation had reversed the balance of moral power. Now the oppressor was the one under the weight of accountability, observed not through the eyes of the young woman alone, but through the awareness of an entire village that had witnessed truth revealed. Respect for the golden girl grew steadily. Villagers approached her with deference, seeking her guidance on matters of fairness, conflict resolution, and community disputes. They listened when she spoke, valuing her words for the wisdom born of both suffering and triumph. Her experiences had given her insight into human behavior, into the nature of envy, cruelty, and hidden virtue. Her advice carried weight because it came not from authority alone, but from someone who had endured injustice and emerged unbroken, empowered, and spiritually affirmed. Even the former tormentors could not help but be transformed by the demonstration of her character. The stepmother, peers, and those who had looked upon her with scorn now faced the reality of their actions, and their shame was accompanied by a profound understanding of the moral order that had guided her rise. They began to participate in acts of restitution, small gestures of acknowledgement, and public recognition of the lessons they had learned. While the girl did not demand these acts, the mere presence of her virtue inspired them to seek redemption, to confront their envy and cruelty, and to adopt humility in their interactions with others. The aura of respect extended beyond human observers. Animals, nature, and even the elements seemed to acknowledge her presence. Birds perched in closer proximity, the wind carried softer breezes around her, and the sun's rays seemed to highlight the golden glow with special brilliance. These subtle signs reinforced the villagers' understanding that her transformation was not just a human miracle but a cosmic or spiritual affirmation of virtue and resilience. The young woman's grace was now a source of inspiration, a living lesson in the alignment of moral strength with spiritual favor. Over time, recognition turned into celebration. Festivals incorporated stories of her endurance, songs praised her courage, and rituals honored the virtues she exemplified. The villagers spoke her name with admiration, recounting her trials and her golden emergence to remind each generation of the consequences of envy and cruelty, and the power of patience, integrity, and inner strength. The girl, now a figure of wisdom and respect, became a moral compass for the community, guiding them through both ordinary and extraordinary challenges. In this recognition, both her dignity and the spiritual blessing upon her were honored. Her former tormentors could only look on with humility, their understanding deepened by the undeniable reality of the moral universe. Cruelty may attempt to suppress virtue, but true integrity and strength inevitably rise, commanding respect, inspiring change, and teaching enduring lessons. The Golden Woman had become more than a survivor. She was a beacon, a testament to the enduring power of justice, resilience, and moral clarity in a world too often clouded by envy and malice.